last night. That means that today we can consider a vote for recommendations for the Pfizer vaccine product. So on our agenda today, we will review the evidence to recommendations framework and clinical considerations. We will then have discussion around those presentations and then a motion to consider recommendations to vote. We will then take a break. We will return for an hour public comment period, and then we will come back for the vote. For everyone's awareness, we will need to vote today both on the Pfizer recommendations. In addition, we will be voting on amendments to the 2021 childhood and adolescent and adult immunization schedules. These schedules were both voted to be approved in October of 2020. We will be considering adding the language that was voted on and approved around COVID vaccination to the immunization schedules for 2021. Finally, I want to welcome all of you liaison members and ex officios, as well as all of you watching the program on the live web stream. I want to assure you that we are getting slides up and available to all of you as quickly as we possibly can. I know we've received several texts and emails this morning, and it is easier for us to continue with our work and get the slides up there than to respond to some of these. But it is the same share file link that was sent out to members and ex officios and liaisons as yesterday. There are two folders, one for Friday presentations and one for Saturday presentations. The slides may not quite be available up on the website, but we are getting them up there as fast as we can as well. And those will be available for the public on our main ACIP website page at www.cdc.gov/vaccines/ACIP. Dr. Romero, I would like for us to quickly introduce and take roll call for just the voting members this morning. And at the same time, I would like for the voting members to indicate their conflict of interest. The persons who have participated, either they or their institutions, who have participated in any of the COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials will be recusing themselves from the vote today for the product-specific recommendations. They will be able to vote on the amendments to the childhood and adolescent and adult immunization schedules. So Dr. Romero, would you like to start with roll call of the voting members only, please?
I will do so. So as indicated by Dr. Cohn, please state your institution and any conflicts of interest. I will begin. Jose Romero, Secretary of Health for the State of Arkansas, Professor of Pediatrics and Infectious Diseases at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. Dr. Atmar.
Thank you, Dr. Romero. Robert Atmar, Professor of Medicine, Baylor College of Medicine. I have a conflict in that I participated in some of the NIH-supported COVID-19 vaccine trials. Over.
Thank you. Let me admit that if I did not say that, I do not have any conflicts of interest, so forgive me. Dr. Alt, please.
Kevin Alt, Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the University of Kansas Medical Center in Kansas City, Kansas. I have no conflicts.
Thank you and good morning. Dr. Bata, Ms. Bata.
Good morning. Lynn Bata, Public Health Nurse, Immunization Clinical Consultant at the Minnesota Department of Health.
Any conflicts, Ms. Bata?
Sorry, no conflicts.
Thank you. Dr. Bell.
Beth Bell, Clinical Professor in the Department of Global Health at the University of Washington. No conflicts.
Good morning and welcome. Dr. Bernstein.
Good morning. This is Hank Bernstein, Professor of Pediatrics at Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra Northwell. I have no conflicts.
Good morning. Dr. Fry.
Sharon Fry, Professor, thank you. Sharon Fry, Professor of Internal Medicine at St. Louis University, St. Louis, Missouri. And I have conflicts because I am participating in phase 3 COVID trials here at St. Louis University. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. Dr. Hunter.
Paul Hunter, Associate Professor of Family Medicine and Community Health at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I have grant funding from Pfizer for a small quality improvement project on pneumococcal conjugate vaccine. Thanks.
Thank you and good morning. Dr. Lee.
Grace Lee, Associate Chief Medical Officer at Stanford Children's Health, Professor of Pediatrics, Stanford University School of Medicine, and I have no conflicts.
Ms. McNally.
Good morning, Veronica McNally, President of the Franny Strong Foundation, based in Michigan, and I have no conflicts.
Thank you and good morning. Dr. Paling.
Good morning. This is Dr. Kathy Paling. I'm a professor of pediatrics and epidemiology and prevention at Wake Forest School of Medicine. I have no conflicts.
Good morning and thank you. Dr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Jose. This is Pablo Sanchez. I'm Professor of Pediatrics in the Division of Neonatology and Pediatric Infectious Diseases at the Nationwide Children's Hospital, The Ohio State University in Columbus. Thank you. No conflicts.
Thank you and good morning. Dr. Szilagyi.
Hi, Peter Szilagyi. I am Professor and Executive Vice Chair of the Department of Pediatrics at UCLA, and I have no conflicts. Thank you.
Good morning, thank you. Dr. Talbot.
Good morning, I'm Kip Talbot. I'm an Associate Professor in Infectious Diseases at Vanderbilt University, and I have no conflicts.
Thank you. So all members are present, 3 with conflicts, Dr. Atmar, Dr. Fry, and Dr. Hunter. Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Back to you.
Great, thank you.
You are muted.
Dr. Romero, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Who? We are muted. It will take a minute. Please go ahead, Dr. Romero. I could actually. Okay. They just said that they can hear you. I said you could hear them. You said you could hear us. Dr. Romero,
so we'll begin with the first topic. Coronavirus disease 2019 vaccines with an introduction by Dr. Beth Bell. Dr. Bell, please.
Thank you. Could I have the slides, please? Thank you. Next, please. For any of you that might not be aware, on December 11th, that is last night, the FDA issued an emergency use authorization for emergency use of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for the prevention of COVID-19 for individuals 16 years of age and older. Next, please. At our emergency meeting yesterday, we heard from the Pfizer-BioNTech people about their clinical development. We had a presentation about the grade analysis for the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. And we heard a summary of the workers' interpretation of the data on the benefits and harms. Today, We will be reviewing the evidence to recommendation framework for the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. We will be talking about the clinical considerations for use of the vaccine. There will be a public comment period, and then there will be votes. One, on the use of Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, and second, inclusion into immunization schedules. And I'll just note that the recommendation for, or the vote on the use of the vaccine is an interim recommendation, and that these recommendations will be coupled with the interim recommendations on allocation, one of which the ACIP has already made, and others of which will be forthcoming in the future. Next, please. Next, please. And here's our list again. And again, next, please. Our list of CDC participants in the work group. Next. Thank you very much for your work so far and for our work today. And back to you, Dr. Romero.
Thank you, Dr. Bell. So next, we'll have Dr. Oliver present evidence to recommendation framework for the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Dr. Oliver, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Next slide. Next slide. So as a reminder, the evidence to recommendations, or ETR framework, is a structure to describe information considered in moving from evidence to ACIP vaccine recommendations. It also provides transparency around the impact of additional factors on deliberation when considering a recommendation. Next slide. As a reminder, this is the policy question we're addressing today. Should vaccination with the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine be recommended for persons 16 years of age and older? Uh-oh.
Dr. Cohen, I'm just checking. We have sound?
Can you hear us, Dr. Romero?
Can anyone hear me from the audience? Voting members?
We can hear.
Yes,
No.
we can hear you, but we cannot hear Dr.
Okay.
So for everyone's awareness, it appears that we are muted on the Zoom call, but not muted on the live webcast. So if you could hang in there for about 2 minutes, we're going to briefly pause and try to sort this out. And we will be back with you shortly. Dr. Romero, you're welcome to sing a song.
I've been notified, this is Jose Romero. I've been notified they are working on audio issues. As I get updates, I will let you know. Thank you very much. I'm told that we will have sound shortly.
Dr. Romero, this is Dr. Oliver. Can you hear me?
I can. Can other members of the audience hear?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Oliver.
Great. Apologies for the prior issues. So we'll start on this slide. As a reminder, this is the policy question that we're addressing today. Should vaccination with the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine be recommended for persons 16 years of age and older under an emergency use authorization? Next slide. This is the PICO question as the focus of our ETR discussion. The population is persons aged 16 years of age and older. The intervention is the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. The comparison is no vaccine. And the outcomes are listed here, which were detailed yesterday. Next slide. These are the domains for the evidence to recommendation framework that we will be discussing today. Each domain has a question or questions that the work group will provide judgment on. Next slide. As we walk through this, we will be changing the vaccine or the intervention in the questions to the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, and we will replace the problem with the COVID-19 disease. Next slide. The first domain we will address is the public health problem. Next slide. The main question associated with this domain is COVID-19 disease of public health importance? The additional questions to help inform this discussion include, are the consequences serious? Is it urgent? And are a large number of people affected by COVID-19? For each domain, we'll be reviewing the available evidence to help answer the questions addressed by this domain. As you can see here, as of December 10th, there have been over 15 million cases of COVID-19 in the US, with increases seen over the last month. Next slide. The cumulative hospitalization rate between March 1st and December 5th was nearly 280 per 100,000 population. Among those hospitalized, nearly 1/3 required intensive care and 15% died. As of December 10th, there were 291,000 COVID-19 associated deaths reported in the US. Estimates of the SARS-CoV-2 infection fatality ratio range from 0.5 to 1.4%. There are other biologic factors associated with the increased incidence, including age and presence of underlying medical conditions, which have been discussed at earlier ACIP meetings. Next slide. So based on the review of the EPI data presented here, as well as EPI data that has been presented at prior ACIP meetings, the work group judgment was that yes, COVID-19 disease is of public health importance. Next slide. Next for the benefits and harms. Next slide. As we discussed yesterday, there are several questions related to the benefits and harms. The first being, how substantial are the desirable anticipated effects? And next, how substantial are the undesirable anticipated effects? Next slide. And finally, do the desirable effects outweigh the undesirable effects? Next slide. Detailed review of the benefits and harms through grade was presented yesterday. Briefly, a summary of the benefits. The clinical trial demonstrated high efficacy against the primary endpoint of symptomatic, laboratory-confirmed COVID-19 with an efficacy of 95%. This was determined to have a high certainty under the time period covered by the EUA. For hospitalization, 5 events occurred and were all in the placebo group. Given low numbers and the short time of follow-up, there was relatively low certainty in the estimate, and for all-cause mortality, deaths were uncommon overall, with 2 in the vaccine group and 4 in the placebo group. Given the low numbers, there was also low certainty in evidence for this outcome. Next slide. Next, a summary for the possible harms. Serious adverse events were reported among recipients of vaccine and placebo. There was moderate certainty in this evidence. And reactogenicity outcome graded was severe or grade 3 reaction. Overall, a grade 3 or higher reaction was reported by 8.8% of those receiving the vaccine versus 2% in the placebo group. And this was graded with a high certainty of evidence. Next slide. This slide shows a summary of grade from yesterday with each evidence type listed. Next slide. Therefore, the work group felt that the desirable anticipated effects were large. Next slide. Back one. And the undesirable anticipated effects were small. Next slide. Based on this, the work group felt when considering how the desirable effects balance with the undesirable effects, it favors the intervention, the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Next slide. So next to the values domain, next slide. Does the target population feel that specifically evaluating how the target population views a balance of the desirable versus undesirable effects? The second question for the values domain is here. Is there important uncertainty about or variability in how much people value the main outcomes? Next slide. For this domain, we conducted a review of the scientific literature, focusing on vaccine intent, confidence, and attitude, with the search terms listed here. The search was updated through December 10th. Next slide. The overall acceptability of a COVID-19 vaccine was moderate. The proportion intending to receive the vaccine ranged from 40 to 80%. Nearly all of these surveys were performed prior to news for any specific vaccine. However, recent surveys conducted had preliminary results from the Pfizer vaccine and showed a large proportion that believed the vaccine would be safe and effective, and that 70% would receive the vaccine if proven safe and effective by public health officials. Vaccine intentions varied over time, by population, and by vaccine characteristics. Acceptance was lowest among Black respondents and highest among Asian respondents. Acceptance was greater with higher socioeconomic status, history of a prior flu vaccine, or a higher COVID risk perception, with a higher VE presumed, and a strong healthcare provider recommendation. Next slide. This slide combines data from 31 surveys showing the proportion reporting positive vaccine intentions by month of data collection, with the bubbles proportional to the survey sample size. Vaccine intent declined since initial surveys in the spring. However, surveys conducted recently have rebounded slightly. 2 studies conducted in the past several weeks since reports of vaccine efficacy reported higher intent. Next slide. This chart shows 6 surveys that provided COVID-19 vaccine acceptance by race and ethnicity. Vaccine acceptance was lowest among Black respondents. Some surveys showed a lower acceptance in Hispanic respondents compared to white respondents, and Asian respondents reported the highest acceptability. Next slide. Broadly across national surveys, many adults reported intention to receive a COVID-19 vaccine with a desire to protect themselves and their community and return to normal. Concerns were raised around side effects, an unknown vaccine efficacy, and the speed of the process. Intentions varied substantially by race or ethnicity and by socioeconomic status. Limitations for these surveys include that many were conducted prior to an available vaccine or any specific data about the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Also, convenient samples for surveys or focus groups may not be representative of the U.S. population. Next slide. So the workgroup interpretation for the first question, does the target population feel the desirable effects are large relative to the undesirable effects? The workgroup felt that the answer was probably yes. And the workgroup noted that the target population values the vaccine vary by population and over time. Next slide. So not surprisingly then, when asked if there was uncertainty about or variability in how much people value the vaccine, the workgroup felt that there was probably important uncertainty or variability. Next slide. Moving to acceptability. Next slide. The main question for this domain is the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine acceptable to key stakeholders, with other questions asking if there are key stakeholders that would not accept the distribution of benefits and harms overall and in the short term. Next slide. For this domain, we conducted a review of the scientific literature, preliminary findings from CDC evaluations of COVID-19 vaccine attitudes, including a survey with state health officers, focus groups with nurses, and online surveys looking at healthcare providers. We looked at broader stakeholders, including professional societies and workers' unions, and we looked at stakeholder opinions regarding programmatic, financial, and ethical aspects. Next slide. There are no published provider knowledge, attitudes, and practices surveys. State health officers voiced concerns with vaccine hesitancy, safety, and communications. Focus groups with nurses demonstrated that most supported prioritizing nurses. Some were reluctant to get vaccinated, especially nurses belonging to racial or ethnic minorities. Another vaccine intent survey among healthcare personnel showed 63% reported that they would get a vaccine once available. Information from the nurses survey also demonstrate moderate acceptability, where 63% were confident the vaccine would be safe and effective, but only 57% were comfortable discussing COVID vaccines with patients. Next slide. Overall, all jurisdictions have submitted vaccine implementation plans, demonstrating at least some level of acceptance with the vaccine. Large and small pharmacy chains are participating in a COVID-19 vaccine program. And while state health officers have concerns around hesitancy, safety, and communications, and nurses report a low percent to receive vaccines, many were willing to be involved in the program. Next slide. The workgroup overall felt that the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine was probably acceptable to key stakeholders. Next slide. Moving to feasibility. Next slide. The question associated with this domain is the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine feasible to implement? Next slide. The workgroup discussed several barriers to implementation, including financial barriers, complexity of the recommendations, and vaccine storage and handling requirements. Next slide. For financial barriers, as has been discussed earlier, COVID vaccines will be provided free of charge. However, health systems or health departments could incur the cost for vaccine implementation and clinics. Next slide. Next, for the complexity of recommendations. Please refer to the FDA-issued instructions regarding storage, handling, and preparation for the vaccine, but there are several steps in the process overall. Next slide. Population access to healthcare or vaccine providers could be limited in rural or other hard-to-reach areas. The ultra-cold storage requirements will limit the range of healthcare providers stocking the vaccine. The minimum size of orders, currently at 975 doses, could limit providers who have access to the vaccine. And the requirements for a 2-dose series could impact feasibility in some populations. Next slide. However, the workgroup discussed that while there are barriers to implementation, that might be insurmountable in traditional circumstances, there have been innovative solutions to overcome these barriers, include expanding funding opportunities, pharmacy partnerships, technology, including second dose reminders, unique packing containers to maintain ultra-cold temperatures without a freezer, and detailed state microplanning. Next slide. Taking these barriers and the novel solutions into account, the work group felt that the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine is probably feasible to implement. Next slide. Next, moving to the resource use domain. Next slide. The primary question for this domain is the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine a reasonable and efficient allocation of resources? Next slide. The work group reviewed estimates of economic costs related to COVID-19 vaccinations, disease outcome, and disease mitigation activities in coordination with the NCIRD and ACIP lead economist. Next slide. Next, for a summary of the evidence, this involves the balances of the cost of COVID-19 disease and costs of the COVID-19 vaccine. For cost of the disease, it was estimated that if 20% of the US population is infected with COVID, the direct medical costs could be $163 billion. Health-related costs of COVID vaccines, including COVID disease, including premature death, long-term health impairment, and mental health impairment, have been estimated at $8.5 trillion. Next slide. For costs associated with the COVID-19 vaccines, the US government has committed to at least $10 billion to Operation Warp Speed for the provision of vaccines. In addition, vaccine doses purchased with US taxpayer dollars will be given to the American people at no cost. Next slide. So for the workgroup interpretation, there are no published cost-effective analyses currently available. The precise cost-effective analysis and economic impact of vaccination depend on a number of factors that are currently unknown, including the duration of vaccine protection, vaccination coverage levels, and implementation costs associated with a large vaccination program. The workgroup concluded that cost effectiveness may not be a primary driver for decision-making during a pandemic and for a vaccine used under an EUA. However, this will need to be reassessed for future recommendations. At this time, the difference by individual vaccine is minimal relative to the overall scale of the pandemic. Next slide. Based on these discussions, the workgroup felt that yes, the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine is a reasonable and allocation efficient of resources. Next slide. Finally, we'll discuss the new equity domain. Next slide. The question for this domain is, what would be the impact of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine on health equity? With additional questions including, are there groups or settings that might be disadvantaged in relation to COVID-19 disease burden? Next slide. For a review of available evidence on equity, we worked to identify groups that might be disadvantaged in relation to COVID-19 disease burden or receipt of the COVID-19 vaccine. This work was done building upon other work that has been done in this area using a Progress Plus system. Progress Plus is an acronym to identify factors associated with unfair differences in disease burden, such as place of residence, race or ethnicity, occupation, gender or sex, religion, education, socioeconomic status, social capital, disability, or other. A review of the scientific and grade literature was conducted, in addition to reviewing CDC COVID-19 response data and resources. Next slide. Data on several specific populations were used to inform this discussion, to identify groups which might be unfairly disadvantaged in relation to COVID-19 disease burden or receipt of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. First, populations from racial and ethnic minorities, populations living in poverty or with high social vulnerability, essential workers, residents in congregate settings, such as long-term care facilities, prisons, homeless shelters, and group homes, people with substance abuse disorders or gender and sexual minorities. Next slide. There are also specific characteristics for the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine that could impact health equity. First, specifically regarding cold chain storage, handling, and administration requirements. The requirement for storage at -80 will likely limit the number and types of facilities that can receive and use the vaccine. This could limit equitable distribution. The vaccine is primarily accessed at large health centers or central distribution sites rather than local community settings. The need for a 2-dose series could lead to challenges in equity as well. Follow-up will be challenging for some disadvantaged groups, including those who are homeless, live in rural locations, or have limited or no access to healthcare. Next slide. It will be important to take advantage of opportunities to increase equitable access to the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. The Federal Pharmacy Partnership Program for COVID vaccines in long-term care facilities will facilitate access of the vaccine to long-term care facilities residents and staff, providing end-to-end management of the COVID vaccine process, including cold chain management and on-site vaccination. Healthcare facilities will need to work to administer and provide equitable access to the vaccine. This could offer the potential to increase equitable distribution to the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, first in healthcare workers and then broadly. Next slide. There were several additional considerations on equity discussed by the work group. Although COVID-19 vaccines will be provided at no cost, personal investment in time and travel to obtain the vaccine may be a barrier for some groups. Equity and vaccination programs are closely linked, and the work group emphasized that federal, state, and local jurisdictions will require adequate resources to get COVID-19 vaccines to the most affected communities and ensure equitable access. Successful implementation of the COVID-19 vaccination program and confidence in COVID-19 vaccines are pivotal to reducing existing health equities related to COVID-19. Next slide. The work group had additional questions regarding considerations that should be made when implementing the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine program to ensure inequities are reduced, including identifying groups disproportionately affected by COVID or who face health inequities, undertaking focused outreach, identifying barriers to vaccination, and conducting active follow-up. Next slide. There was a quote that resonated with the work group that I had shared previously and will share again, emphasizing that successful implementation of the COVID-19 vaccine programs are pivotal to reducing health inequities, that increasing the availability of an effective intervention within a country or region is not necessarily enough to reduce inequities. The intervention has to be accessible, acceptable, effective in, and used by the most disadvantaged groups within that population to be truly effective at reducing inequities in health. Next slide. Therefore, the work group interpretation was that the impact of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine would probably be reduced in health equity, given many of the barriers related to the vaccine. Next slide. In summary, next slide. These are each of the domains for the evidence to recommendation framework, the questions, and the work group judgments. Next slide. The work group then discussed the balance of consequences overall related to the evidence of the PICO question, the policy question, and the evidence that has been presented. Next slide. Overall, the work group felt that the desirable consequences clearly outweighed the undesirable consequences in most settings. Next slide. Therefore, the work group discussed the type of recommendation proposed to ACIP to consider. The three options are listed here. Do not recommend the intervention, recommend the intervention for individuals based on shared clinical decision-making, or recommending the intervention. Next slide. The work group conclusion and proposition to ACIP is that they recommend the intervention of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Next slide. Thank you, and I'll take questions.
Thank you again for another excellent presentation, Dr. Oliver. We will open this up for comments and questions from the voting members initially, and then we'll move on to other groups. So any comments or questions? Dr. Szilagyi, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Oliver, as always, for an incredibly clear presentation. Just a couple of comments regarding this is all about implementation, and I completely agree with the work group's recommendation. In terms of acceptability from these national surveys, and I have actually conducted several of these surveys, I do want to point out two things. One is that the variability in the percentages who are likely to get the vaccine. So the fact that they vary means that this is modifiable, that it's mutable, and that hesitancy for the vaccine is not necessarily entrenched. And so what that implies to me is we need a lot of work in optimal communication and outreach to these populations. Also, in those surveys, there were a large proportion who said unsure. And so that actually magnifies my point. The second point about feasibility, I do want to point out, I know the vaccine will be available for free. There has been concern, and we raised this yesterday on MacPac, that there is a very small proportion of adults who are covered by Medicaid who are in this optional Medicaid, optional benefits component. If once the public health emergency ends, they may not be fully covered by the vaccine. And so maybe worth just looking into that small population. A point about the second doses, studies of reminder recall have shown that they're actually pretty effective for second doses because people who've gotten the first dose are not hesitant. So that really magnifies the importance of registries and reminder recall. A very quick point about costs. The $8.5 trillion that was mentioned in the total cost was health-related costs, so that if we include indirect costs, it's magnified exponentially. And the final point about equity, it's very concerning to me that the two groups, individuals who are Black and lower education, have both high morbidity from COVID and are the most hesitant to get the vaccine. So we need a tremendous amount of outreach and funding of localities for outreach to ensure that equity is really properly addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Szilagyi. Dr. Goldman, please.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment to comment on the gravity of this as we contemplate recommending a vaccine in the middle of a global pandemic that has not been experienced in our lifetime. I first want to thank and applaud all the hard work done by not only the committee members, but all the physicians, scientists, and staff of the CDC for their tireless dedication and monumental service. The speed with which this vaccine has been developed is truly a testament to our scientific ability. While the data and evidence do support that the benefits far outweigh the risks, I want to express some caution in recommendations outside the parameters of groups enrolled in the studies. We need to make sure our patients are well aware of the potential side effects and ensure that with such a limited supply, they will commit to receiving both doses. This speaks to the importance of acceptance of the vaccine. I do support the approval of this vaccine, but I want to strongly support the ongoing studies in both safety, efficacy, and use in groups other than those specifically studied in the trials. Finally, I want to also reiterate my concerns on the distribution of this vaccine and stress the importance of prioritization of frontline outpatient physician offices that are not being allocated doses of vaccines by many hospitals and healthcare systems, even though they remain at some of the highest risks for COVID-19 disease. Thank you so much for this presentation and allowing me to be part of this group.
Dr. Goldman, thank you for your comments and your work on this committee. Let me just say the following. There will be time for comments and for discussion afterwards. I think what we want to do at this moment is focus on questions that are important for the group to consider. So please, questions only at this time. We will give you a chance to make comments later. Dr. Paling, please.
Thank you, Dr. Romero. Thank you, Dr. Oliver, for a very clear and precise presentation on a very important topic. I agree with Dr. Szilagyi as well as Dr. Goldman on the importance of additional opportunities and the opportunities. I would like to ask, in the work group, it is recommended to move forward. Could you please describe if this was a unanimous or what was the variation in opinion within this group?
This is Dr. Oliver. The work group was unanimous in recommending that the ACIP accept the recommendation and that it be recommended in the setting of the EUA.
Wonderful. Thank you. That is tremendously helpful.
Thank you. Dr. Sanchez.
Thank you. Sarah, that was, I agree, another great presentation. I just wanted to, just a comment, because we heard yesterday from Pfizer, yes, the vaccine, the ultra-cold storage is a problem, but they also mentioned that it could be stored in a refrigerator for 5 days. So I think that also needs to be sent out as because that certainly helps a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Sanchez. This is Dr. Cohn. We are doing, now that the EUA has been approved, there are multiple communication and education products that will be released both by the company. There's some great videos on how to administer and prepare the vaccine, as well as some on storage and handling. And then CDC will be making sure that all of our materials align with the EUA, and then we'll also be sharing communication products around the storage and handling of this product, which you are correct can be refrigerated for 5 to 6 days.
Thank you, Dr. Cohn. Thank you, Dr. Sanchez. Any other comments or questions? If I may add one to what's already been said, I think that the issue of we're seeing more and more nurses and healthcare providers saying they'd rather wait to accept the vaccine. I think that's going to place an issue on our implementation of phases as we move forward. But there is that issue that we need to consider, and it will make it somewhat more difficult as we progress or try to progress down the phase ladder. So, Dr. Dushan, please. Dr. Dushan, we're not hearing. Thank you.
Little mute button problem. Thank you very much. Very gratifying to see this progress. And as I've mentioned before, the investment in Operation Warp Speed has been unprecedented and has paid off greatly. But I do not want to let people in any way minimize the significant implications of the implementation challenges. And in particular, I would like to say that the funding necessary for state and local health departments to carry out this program has been put in the deep freeze with the vaccine. We are desperately needing to be able to carry out an unprecedented an immunization program of unprecedented complexity and importance with formidable implementation challenges that include what has been noted around the importance of engagement and education of hesitant communities, vaccination of hard-to-reach populations, the complexity of engaging with community vaccinators and healthcare systems to ensure equitable distribution and allocation of this vaccine throughout the community, and other tasks. And I want to encourage all of us to do what we can to ensure that this vaccine program is as successful as it can possibly be by making sure that the resources are available on the front lines to those people who need to implement this program. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the liaison groups? Any comments from our ex officios? I see, here we go. Dr. Hayes, please.
Yes, Carol Hayes with the American College of Nurse Midwives. I have heard from my colleagues in the hospital that some of the nurses and healthcare workers are unwilling to be vaccinated because they have heard that it's going to affect their fertility. And there are some other myths that are floating around. And I feel like if our main focus on this 1A is to vaccinate healthcare workers in the hospital that are taking care of patients, we're going to have to really seriously address these myths that are floating around. And I'm not even sure how to start to do that, but I just wanted to make the comment.
Thank you very much. Dr. Freihofer.
Sandra Freihofer, American Medical Association, speaking as a practicing physician. I am so excited that we have this vaccine available, but particularly after listening to the comments so far, I'm very concerned about the implementation. I'm very concerned that enough dollars haven't been put in the distribution to get vaccine in the arms of our patients. I'm excited that our pharmaceutical colleagues are helping with this implementation distribution, but at the end of the day, patients depend on their physician to give them advice as to whether or not they should get vaccinated. Physician recommendation is a very important motivator for patients to get vaccinated, and there's going to be a lot to talk to our patients about. I'm also concerned that hospitals might not offer this vaccine to community physicians, that they might try to just keep it for their employees and not consider that other physicians who might be on staff that are on the front line seeing patients that could have COVID might not have access to the vaccine. So as we move forward, I hope that every organization that has access to this vaccine will look at the big picture and not be selfish with what they have, but really do a good job of trying to prioritize and think this process through and help everyone get vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Romero? This is
Yes,
Dr.
sir.
Khan.
Yes,
I'd like to put up one slide to address some of the questions that are coming up. It's going to take a minute, but I do want to just let everyone know that as we've discussed during prior ACIP meetings, we do have a limited number of doses for the first several weeks, and it will take time to be able to increase the number of provider sites to ensure that we can get access as wide as possible. We need to have enough doses before we're able to do that. So we are working on a plan, right? We are implementing a plan to now vaccinate in limited sites, particularly healthcare settings, long-term care facilities, and public health clinics. And then as we have more doses of vaccine, those sites will expand, and we will rely on our doctors and clinical providers and pharmacies to help increase coverage. But I do want to reiterate what Dr. Freihofer said, which is that in the interim, we need all healthcare providers to be recommending vaccination for their patients, even if they are not able to give it to them in that moment. So I'm pulling up a slide that we can just leave up for a minute. It's the new CDC communication toolkit for clinics, clinicians, and healthcare providers. It has a lot of tools to help all of you administer vaccine and recommend vaccine to the people who work around you and with you and to the public. So we will put it up in a minute, but you can find it by Googling CDC COVID vaccine healthcare provider toolkit.
While we're waiting for that to come up, Dr. Stinchfield, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, Patsy Stinchfield from NAP. I would like to direct my comment directly to the nursing considerations as we move into this important vaccination phase of this historic endeavor. As nurses being the largest role in that category 1A. I was the first nurse voting member of ACIP back in 04 to 08 and a liaison member since then. So I have 16 years with ACIP. And I can give the public and nurses specifically my full confidence in this process, in the scientific incredible breakthrough with our mRNA platform. with the commitment to ongoing safety monitoring and transparent communication. Just as nurses have worked every step of this pandemic, from vaccine researchers to participants in clinical trials, to expert, compassionate, direct patient caregivers, to leading hospital pandemic planning, we will see nurses help implement vaccination at the local level. And like influenza vaccine, where nurses are vaccinated at 90%, I am confident nurses, after filling their knowledge gaps about the novel vaccine, will not step aside, but as always will step up and raise that lamp to the path out of this pandemic, which is through vaccination. So I'm happy to hear about the toolkit. I think we need a public communication campaign, and we have to help equip our nurses and all of our healthcare providers with education and communication tools. But I am confident that nurses will rise to the occasion, be vaccinated, and encourage their patients to do so as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Intro.
Dr. Montero, this is Dr. Messonnier. May I just say something?
Of course, please.
I just, Ms. Stinchfield and all of the community that is speaking, I just want to know how much we value and appreciate your advocacy and how much we are dependent on it for the smooth rollout of this vaccine, as well as on the state and local health departments. Some of the questions that you all are bringing up, or your comments, are incredibly important. We think that the next couple talks where we really move to talk around clinical considerations might provide more context on that. So far, it doesn't seem like anybody actually has any specific questions around the ETR framework, but if we could just ask if there are any specific questions or clarifications around that, and perhaps if we go on to the next couple talks, it'll address some of the concerns that are coming up in these other comments. Over.
Thank you, Dr. Messonnier. So let me turn to who is on the waiting list. So those of you who wish to ask questions, then we'll save our comments for later. Dr. Weiser?
I'll hold my comment till later.
Thank you very much. Dr. Lee?
One clarification for the ETR framework, and it's with regard to implementation. So I understand our charter says that we are responsible for recommendations of use of the vaccine in the U.S. civilian population. I just want to confirm that this will also address vaccination in those who are not citizens or who may be undocumented in our implementation efforts in terms of coverage, access, and minimizing or eliminating costs of the vaccine.
Dr. Lee, the language that you just described in the charter is the language we use to for our recommendations.
Thank you for those comments. Thank you for the clarification, Dr. Cohn. The slide before you, then, these are the slides that you were talking about, Dr. Cohn?
Yes. Apologies for the delay.
I'm just giving people time to snap a picture or write the material down. Okay. Dr. Freihofer.
Could you also please write the specific thing to Google to get access to these wonderful materials? Thank you.
Noted.
Yes, we will send out a link, and after we take a break, we will put up the link and the Google search for everybody on a slide. There's a lot of materials and more to come.
Okay. One more call for questions or comments specific to the presentation. Dr. Cohn, I'm not seeing any. Shall we move on to clinical considerations by Dr. Mumbe? Okay. Clinical considerations, then will be our next presentation by Sarah Mumbe.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I will be reviewing clinical considerations for the use of Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine in the United States. These CDC clinical considerations are informed by data submitted to the Food and Drug Administration for emergency use authorization, or EUA, of the vaccine, other data sources, best practice guidelines for immunization, and expert opinion. These considerations may be updated as further information becomes available. In addition to these considerations, the EUA conditions of use and storage, handling, and administration procedures described in the package insert should be referenced when using the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine. Next slide. First, I'll start with vaccine administration. The Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine series consists of 2 doses administered intramuscularly 3 weeks apart. Administration of the second dose within a 4-day grace period, i.e. between day 17 and 21, is considered valid, consistent with guidance for other vaccines. If more than 21 days have elapsed since the first dose, the second dose should be given at the earliest opportunity. However, the series does not need to be repeated. Both doses are necessary for protection. Efficacy of a single dose has not been systematically evaluated. Next slide. The Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine is not interchangeable with other COVID-19 vaccine products, and the safety and efficacy of a mixed product series has not been evaluated. Persons initiating vaccination with Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine should complete the series with this product. If 2 doses of different mRNA COVID-19 vaccine products are inadvertently administered, no additional doses of either product are recommended at this time. Recommendations may be updated as further information becomes available or other vaccine types are authorized. Next slide. Given the lack of data on the safety and efficacy of Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine administered simultaneously with other vaccines, Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine should be administered alone with a minimum interval of 14 days before or after administration with any other vaccines. If the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine is inadvertently administered within 14 days of another vaccine, doses do not need to be repeated for either vaccine. Next slide. Next, I will review the considerations for vaccination of persons with a prior SARS-CoV-2 infection or exposure. Next slide. Data from clinical trials suggest that Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine is safe and likely efficacious in persons with evidence of a prior SARS-CoV-2 infection. Vaccination should be offered to persons regardless of history of prior symptomatic or asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infection. Viral or serologic testing to assess for acute or prior infection, respectively, is not recommended for the purpose of vaccine decision-making. Vaccination of persons with known current SARS-CoV-2 infection should be deferred until the person has recovered from the acute illness if the person had symptoms. Next slide. Should be deferred until the person has recovered from the acute illness if the person had symptoms and criteria have been met for them to discontinue isolation. While there is otherwise no recommended minimum interval between infection and vaccination, current evidence suggests that reinfection is uncommon in the 90 days after initial infection. Thus, persons with documented acute SARS-CoV-2 infection in the preceding 90 days may delay vaccination until near the end of this period if desired. Next slide. Currently, there are no data on the safety and efficacy of Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccination in persons who received monoclonal antibodies or convalescent plasma as part of COVID-19 treatment. Based on the estimated half-life of such therapies, as well as evidence suggesting that reinfection is uncommon in the 90 days after initial infection, vaccination should be deferred for at least 90 days as a precautionary measure until additional information becomes available to avoid interference of the treatment with vaccine-induced immune responses. Next slide. Persons in the community or outpatient setting who have had a known COVID-19 exposure should not seek vaccination until their quarantine period has ended to avoid potentially exposing healthcare personnel and other persons to SARS-CoV-2 during the vaccination visit. For persons residing in congregate healthcare settings, such as long-term care facilities, where exposure and transmission of SARS-CoV-2 can occur repeatedly for long periods of time, residents with a known COVID-19 exposure may be vaccinated. In these settings, healthcare personnel are already in contact with residents, for example, by entering patient rooms for evaluation and treatment, and should employ appropriate infection prevention and control procedures. Thus, administering COVID-19 vaccines should not result in additional exposures. Residents of other congregate settings, such as correctional facilities and homeless shelters, with a known COVID-19 exposure may also be vaccinated in order to avoid delays and missed opportunities for vaccination, given the increased risk for outbreaks in these settings. However, where feasible, precautions should be taken to limit mixing of these individuals with other residents or staff, except those essential for the provision of vaccination services, who should employ appropriate infection and control procedures. Next slide. Next, I'll review vaccination of special populations. Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine may be administered to persons with underlying medical conditions who have no contraindications to vaccination. Phase 2 to 3 clinical trials demonstrated similar safety and efficacy profiles in persons with underlying medical conditions, including those that place them at increased risk for severe COVID-19 compared to persons without comorbidities. Next slide. Persons with HIV infection, other immunocompromising conditions, or who take immunosuppressive medications or therapies might be at increased risk for severe COVID-19. Data are not currently available to establish vaccine safety and efficacy in these groups. However, these individuals may still receive COVID-19 vaccination if they have no contraindications to vaccination, but should be counseled about the unknown vaccine safety profile and effectiveness in immunocompromised populations, as well as the potential for reduced immune responses and the need to continue to follow all current guidance to protect themselves against COVID-19. Next slide. There are no data on the safety of COVID-19 vaccines in pregnant women. Animal developmental and reproductive toxicity studies are ongoing and results are expected to be available soon, and studies in humans are ongoing and planned. mRNA vaccines are not considered live vaccines. They are degraded quickly by normal cellular processes and don't enter the nucleus of the cell. Observational data demonstrate that while the absolute risk is low, pregnant women with COVID-19 have an increased risk of severe illness, including ICU admission, mechanical ventilation, and death. Additionally, they might be at increased risk of adverse pregnancy outcomes, such as preterm birth. Thus, if a woman is part of a group, such as healthcare personnel, who is recommended to receive a COVID-19 vaccine and is pregnant, she may choose to be vaccinated. A discussion with her healthcare provider can help her make an informed decision. Next slide. Pregnant women and healthcare providers should consider the level of COVID-19 community transmission, her personal risk of contracting COVID-19, the risks of COVID-19 to her and potential risk to the fetus, the efficacy of the vaccine, the side effects of the vaccine, and the lack of data about the vaccine use during pregnancy. Pregnant women who experience fever following vaccination should be counseled to take acetaminophen, as fever has been associated with adverse pregnancy outcomes. Acetaminophen may be offered as an option for pregnant women experiencing other symptoms as well. Routine testing for pregnancy prior to receipt of a COVID-19 vaccine is not recommended. Next slide. There are no data on the safety of COVID-19 vaccines in lactating women or the effects of mRNA vaccines on the breastfed infant or milk production or excretion. mRNA vaccines are not considered live virus vaccines and are not thought to be a risk to the breastfeeding infant. Thus, if a lactating woman is part of a group, such as healthcare personnel, who is recommended to receive a COVID-19 vaccine, she may choose to be vaccinated. Next slide. Next, I will review considerations for patient vaccine counseling. Next slide. Before vaccination, providers should counsel vaccine recipients about expected local and systemic post-vaccination symptoms. Unless persons develop a contraindication to vaccination, They should be encouraged to complete the series even if they develop local or systemic symptoms following the first dose in order to optimize protection against COVID-19. Antipyretic or analgesic medications, such as acetaminophen or nonsteroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, may be taken for the treatment of post-vaccination local or systemic symptoms if medically appropriate. However, routine prophylactic administration of these medications for the purpose of preventing post-vaccination symptoms is not currently recommended, as information on the impact of such use on Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine-induced antibody responses is not available at this time. Next slide. 2 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine are required to achieve high efficacy. Thus, patients should be counseled on the importance of completing the 2-dose series in order to optimize protection. Next slide. However, protection from the vaccine is not immediate. The currently available vaccine is a 2-dose series, and it will take 1 to 2 weeks following the second dose before a person is considered fully vaccinated. Additionally, as no vaccine is 100% effective, some vaccinated people may still get COVID-19 disease. Given the currently limited information on how well the vaccine works in the general population, how much it may reduce disease severity or transmission, and how long protection lasts, vaccinated persons should continue to follow all current guidance, including those listed below, to protect themselves and others. Next slide. Next, I'll review contraindications and precautions. Next slide. Severe allergic reaction, such as anaphylaxis, to any component of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine is a contraindication to vaccination listed in the package insert. Appropriate medical treatment used to manage immediate allergic reactions must be immediately available in the event that an acute anaphylactic reaction occurs following administration of the vaccine. In addition, because of reports of anaphylactic reactions in persons vaccinated outside of clinical trials, persons who have had a severe allergic reaction to any vaccine or injectable therapy should not receive the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine at this time. Vaccination providers should observe patients with a history of anaphylaxis not due to vaccines or other injectable medications, as mentioned before. That is a contraindication in these persons. Should be observed for 30 minutes after vaccination. All other persons should be observed for 15 minutes after vaccination to monitor for the occurrence of immediate adverse reactions. Finally, I'll review the interpretation of SARS-CoV-2 test results in vaccinated persons. Prior receipt of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine will not affect the results of SARS-CoV-2 nucleic acid amplification or antigen tests. Currently available antibody tests for SARS-CoV-2 assess IgM and/or IgG to one of 2 viral spike proteins. Sorry, next slide, please. Apologies for that. So as mentioned, prior receipt of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine will not affect the results of SARS-CoV-2 nucleic amplification or antigen tests. Currently available antibody tests for SARS-CoV-2 assess IgM and/or IgG to one of 2 viral proteins, spike or nucleocapsid. Because the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine contains mRNA that encodes the spike protein, a positive test for spike protein, IgM or IgG, could indicate either prior infection or vaccination. To evaluate for evidence of prior infection in an individual with a history of Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccination, a test specifically evaluating IgM or IgG to the nucleocapsid protein should be used. Next slide. Next slide. Now we'd like to get ACIP's opinion in the following areas: use of the vaccine in immunocompromised persons and pregnant or lactating women, the proposed contraindications to vaccination and recommendations for an observation period, or any other considerations.
Sorry, I was having trouble getting off mute. This is open for discussion. Let me begin with the following question, splitting one of the statements a little finer with regard to contraindications. So if you go back to the slide on contraindications regarding allergic reactions to vaccines, can we do that? Okay, so I agree with this, and I just want to point out the following. So under injectable therapy, that is a very broad category. So for example, someone who receives intravenous ampicillin and develops an allergic reaction would be considered then not eligible for this vaccine. Correct? And if you put that in the context that another person who receives oral ampicillin and has an allergic reaction would then be eligible for this vaccine. There is going to be some confusion here with that. I just want to point that out.
Thank you for that comment. I think we could work on providing a little bit more guidance around situations where it might be acceptable, such as if the person is under the care of an allergist immunologist. I think the intention was because the investigation is still kind of ongoing around particular excipients that might be involved, and some of these could be in other medications. This was cast a little bit broadly initially, just as things continue to be investigated, but we could work on some additional guidance so that too many people aren't excluded unnecessarily.
Dr. Monteiro, this is Dr. Messonnier. We would appreciate some more conversation on this language as we're trying to very carefully thread a needle in a space where I think a lot of us feel like we're still not completely clear on all the available data because it's still being gathered. We don't want to create unnecessary concern. We don't want to exclude people unnecessarily, but there is a desire to be careful here to exclude individuals that might have a higher risk. So our intention is, to get some more input, to modify the language already to sort of give a space where, somebody who had a reaction, their mother told them they had an anaphylaxis reaction 50 years ago to penicillin, isn't the same thing as somebody who had a observed anaphylaxis 18 months ago. And so we can, we're trying to simplify, but we will add in some additional language. And as Dr. Mabai said, our intention is frankly to revisit this quickly as soon as more information is available. But it would be helpful to us to get a little more dialogue as to the spirit of this. We will work on the wordsmithing over.
Thank you very much. Dr. Alt, please.
I think the language around pregnancy is very good. We talked quite a bit about this yesterday, and lactation. As we discussed yesterday, it's hard to come up with a prior reason to avoid this vaccine in lactating women. I also liked in the pregnancy section where we made the pregnant healthcare worker, the pregnant person, the focus, and gave them some good things to think about their level of exposure.
Thank you. Dr. Hunter, please.
Yes, I want to say that this level of detail and thoughtfulness is really, really helpful. There's one particular thing I'm interested in, which would be very helpful on an implementation level. Did I hear correctly that if a second mRNA vaccine is given and it's not the same as the first one, that then the series is considered complete?
Thanks for that question. So at this time, that is correct. I should say at this time, we are not recommending any additional doses if a mixed series of mRNA vaccines are given. I think that is something that we'll continue to evaluate over time as more information becomes available, as well as vaccine supply becomes sufficient to ensure that we have adequate supply. So I think that that's something that we'll continue to revisit. But for now, yes, we are not. For any deviations from the schedule at this point, we aren't recommending additional doses.
Hi, this is Dr. Dueling. I'd like I'd like to add that the work group, the mixed series is not recommended, but the work group felt at this time, given the extreme shortage of vaccine combined with the fact that we've not studied more than 2 doses in any subjects, that it warranted not repeating any doses if a mixed series was given at this time.
And this, Dr. Cohn, I will just
comment that this makes sense from my level of understanding of immunology and mRNA technology, which is limited as a practicing family physician and local health department, public health consultant. But if others agree that that's, I assume on the work group agree that that's fine to do, that is extremely helpful from an implementation point of view. So thanks much.
Thank you. Dr. Cohn, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to add that we anticipate, especially early, that this will happen as rarely, very rarely, given the large number of different ways we have in place to ensure that an individual knows the first product they received, and the healthcare provider will know what the individual received the first time, given all of the immunization registry and other data things that have been put into place. So it is not recommended, but when it rarely happens, you would not be recommended to restart the series.
Thank you very much. Dr. Goldman.
Thank you. I have 2 questions to clarify around administration, if you could. The first is regards to those who are recently infected. In one sense, it seems that you're saying you can give it quickly after they've met all recovery criteria, but then it suggests we want to wait 90 days because we think they still have some immunity. Do we want to clarify that to just leave it as if you have documented infection, wait 90 days? That's the first one. And the second question regarding congregate settings, where we don't want to not give it in a quarantine setting because we're presumed that there's ongoing exposure. But if there is an outbreak in a congregate facility, are we going to still give the vaccine to those who are not symptomatic, or do we want to wait at some point to test to see if they are actively infected? I was unsure of the language regarding those 2 settings, if we could clarify perhaps.
Sure. So just to clarify first for the question about congregate settings, I think the intent of the language, and we can work on making sure it's clearer. I think the intent of the language is in these settings, because of how frequently cases or outbreaks are reported, that you could end up with very prolonged periods where there has been recent cases. And we don't want these settings to have experienced unnecessarily delays in implementing vaccination, or make it, have significant barriers to efficiently implement the vaccination. So the idea behind the guidance is in these congregate settings that vaccination could go ahead and proceed, just making sure to implement appropriate infection prevention and control procedures and limit mixing of the populations to the extent possible. Hopefully that clarifies it.
Thank you. Dr. Bata, Ms. Bata, excuse me.
A couple questions. Do we have any, are we going to say anything about what to do about a delayed schedule? And maybe that isn't something that fits in here, but I think that would be helpful to have because we're already hearing questions like that. And then just some observations related to contraindications and precautions. I think it's important for people to understand what severe allergic reaction means, maybe providing some examples, because this is something that we struggle with other vaccines too, and some patient's perception of a severe allergic reaction and what we are thinking as severe allergic reactions may be very, very different. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the first question around delayed schedules, so we do not have a maximum kind of period by which the second dose would need to be received. There really isn't data to inform this at this time. In the clinical trials, people were able to receive the vaccine up to 42 days. And so that's the kind of the extent at which during the clinical trials people received that second dose. So at this time, we aren't putting a maximum kind of time by which a second dose needs to be repeated. We are just saying that the second dose should be given as soon as possible after that day 21 period, but no doses would need to be repeated based on a prolonged interval between doses at this time. In terms of your second question, yes, we are developing materials for healthcare providers, including fact sheets and checklists to help them kind of understand the symptoms behind severe allergic reaction.
Thank you. Dr. Talbot.
Yes, and this is one that Dr. Romero and I slightly disagree on, but I would still like to bring up and discuss. When it comes to healthcare workers that are in quarantine, that are in the middle of their vaccines, it would be ideal if we could go ahead and finish vaccination so that when they're done with their quarantine, they're also done with their immunization and back to work. So is that something that we could consider changing just for the healthcare workers at this time?
I think we would need to discuss that further. We will have guidance posted tomorrow. We have developed guidance around related to issues around healthcare workers and vaccination and et cetera. But we had not at this point included specifically healthcare workers who are in their quarantine period. So it's something we'd have to kind of, I think, review and revisit.
The reason why I'm saying this is because one of the largest reasons that we are short healthcare workers is quarantine. And so if they're already out on quarantine, it's an ideal time to have all the symptoms associated with the immunogenicity. And so all that's done when they're ready to come back to work. Just a thought.
So let me put another wrinkle into this, Dr. Talbot. So, and I won't get into the details, but newer recommendations for quarantine have been issued, and shortening the period depends on not having any symptoms. So that if it's administered to the individual, they develop symptoms, they wouldn't fall under those new regulations, and quarantine would be prolonged. But I'm not going to discuss this at this point. You and I have jousted on this before.
Actually, I was going to say you bring up a very valid point, and thank you. Thank you.
So there is, without further discussion of this, let's move on to Dr. Freihofer.
Sandra Freihofer, liaison for the American Medical Association. I have two comments. The first is about pregnant women, and I'm very reassured by Dr. Alt's comment. I love the wording about the pregnant woman may choose to be vaccinated. I love the fact that you mentioned the nuance about use of prophylactic medicines for fever, and the fact that pregnant women who have a fever should take them because the fever itself puts a risk to the pregnant woman. I take issue with one of the lines that animal development and reproductive toxicity studies are ongoing, because we heard yesterday from the drug manufacturer that these studies have been done. The results just haven't been released. So we really need to put those results on warp speed and get them out there to give our physicians and pregnant women more information, or at least access to the information that has been done. And I'm glad that the company is going to closely follow the 23 pregnancies that have occurred in the study trial as those babies are born. My second comment is about the guidelines for reactogenicity, and I really like that that providers should counsel vaccine recipients about expected local and systemic post-vaccination symptoms, but practitioners need more information and more guidance, and I assume those sorts of specific things will be upcoming, particularly for healthcare professionals. Do they need to plan vaccination the day before they're going to not have to go to work? specifics on how to tease out if the fever is due to vaccination or possibly due to a COVID exposure. And then I want to tie back to the pregnancy part. We have 330,000 healthcare professionals that are likely to become pregnant or be in the postpartum time as this vaccination implementation program begins. And this doesn't even include the essential workers for whom pregnancy is also concerned. So moving forward as quickly as we can to get the information as quickly as we can would be greatly appreciated. So please put that DART information on warp speed.
Thank you, Dr. Pfeiffer. Did somebody else want to make a comment about that? Okay.
The only
Bell,
comment I was
please.
going to make is that the issues around reactogenicity and symptoms following vaccination for healthcare workers, that guidance will be coming out tomorrow, along with guidance around vaccination symptoms in long-term care facility residents. So hopefully many of your concerns, Dr. Pfeiffer, would be addressed in that guidance.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bell, please.
Thank you. Returning to Dr. Messonnier's questions about the sort of additional contraindications that are proposed, I assume and I know that everyone is doing everything they can to get better information and follow up on the UK incident. I recognize the rationale for including this, but I am a little nervous about this sort of abundance of caution rationale, because it's oftentimes very hard to undo, even when one says there's new data and we're undoing it. And so I'm wondering if it's in some part of this box here, or there could be further clarification, something to the effect of history of a food allergy, a snake venom allergy, or a environmental allergy are not a contraindication, so that there's a clear distinction between what we're talking about here and what we're concerned about, and this much broader group of allergies that involves an awful lot of people and who we don't need to include in this.
That's a great point, and we will absolutely add that to our language.
Thank you. Dr. Kimberlin, please.
David Kimberlin, AAP Red Book. I would just like to echo Dr. Alt's comments about breastfeeding and my satisfaction with the wording as proposed on the slides.
Thank you very much. Dr. Dries, and a reminder to all who have spoken, lower your arms, your hands, if you're done speaking. Thank you. Dr. Dries, please.
Thank you, Marcy Dries from Shea. I actually have a comment and two questions. Ms. Bata's comment about defining severe allergic reactions got me thinking about that we hear hesitancy around allergy, not from people necessarily who have, or not only from people who have personal history of allergy, but a family history of allergy. And so if that could be addressed in that clarification, that would be great. My first question is around the history of allergy to any component of the Pfizer vaccine. I'm just looking at the fact sheet now, and it lists, a dozen or so different chemical compounds that nobody is going to recognize. And I know yesterday the manufacturer brought up a specific medication that was similar, and that might be a concern, although, I did not catch the name. It's not a medicine I was familiar with, but if that could be clarified, if that is really considered a contraindication or not. And then around the pregnancy language, I absolutely agree with the language. And I've heard from healthcare workers who are pregnant and or lactating and who are desiring a vaccine that if they were told they couldn't get it because of that status, they might lie if they're able to, if they're not showing. And I don't think we would want that to happen. And so I am also wondering, is there going to be a pregnancy registry that will be stood up, or should we be following these people locally who are pregnant or lactating? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Jose. No, I just also wanted to to support Dr. Alton, Dr. Kimberlin's comments. First of all, I'm glad that pregnancy and breastfeeding lactating women were considered separately, and I am in favor of the pregnancy designation, and saying that it is up to the woman, and I think a registry would be fantastic. I also think a similar registry for lactating women as well, and I think I'm very much in agreement that the lactating woman and the breastfed baby is very different, again, than just the vaccine administration during pregnancy, and so I really do support it. I do want to comment in terms of the immunocompromised host. It says persons with HIV and other immunocompromising conditions might be at increased risk, but we have to also somewhere state that the study did enroll so-called stable HIV-infected individuals. So I think that there are at least some data on HIV-infected individuals, so I think that should be included because it's just a very broad category, because they also included stable hepatitis B and C. Offhand, I can't remember how many they were, but I think just some clarification of immunocompromised persons, including HIV, that they were included in the study. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Dr. Eckert.
Thank you very much. This is Dr. Linda Eckert, representing the American College of OBGYN. And I just wanted to let the committee know that we had a phone call this morning that the CDC convened of several experts in the United States in placental pathology, immunology, kinetics of the vaccine, how it works. And the overall consensus, complete consensus, was that we don't see a biological plausibility at this time for placental transfer of the mRNA, and that we see that the direct fetal exposure and possibility of fetal inflammatory response is extremely unlikely. Clearly, we are waiting for data. We look forward to the DART data, and we look forward to studies in pregnant women. But at this point, we are very supportive of the permissive recommendation. And I just want to assure people, as they've been making a call here, that ACOG is prepared to support clinicians, OB-GYNs, and others by providing clinical guidance and clinical conversation talking points and educational materials. And we look forward to having those out as soon as feasible, which we hope is quite soon, early next week. I'll be happy to answer other questions if you have them about this conversation, many others on ACIP or on this call. We're also on that call, but I just wanted to let the committee know that there has been a very broad discussion and definite consensus reached about the permissive recommendation for this use in pregnancy. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Goldman.
I'm just wondering, and kind of echoing your concerns and comments on the allergies, if we want to change the language to observe severe allergic reactions, and that kind of takes out the what we see all the time where the patient says, when I was an infant, I was told I was always allergic by my parents, but we don't have that direct data. So do we want to clarify that language, or is that too broad of a category for the intramuscular, intravenous, and subcutaneous injections of any therapy to just change it to observe severe allergic reactions?
Thank you. Yes, we'll continue to work to make this language as clear as possible.
Thank you. Dr. Paling. Dr. Paling, I think you're still on mute.
Thank you. First, I want to express my thanks to all who have been working, and Dr. Eckert and Alt, about for their support of the breastfeeding and pregnancy recommendation. I agree with the language, and I like the fact that the woman has the consideration of the woman is first, and that the physicians are available and going to be able to support them. I also wanted to reiterate Ms. Bata's point about severe allergic reactions. I'm wondering if that shouldn't be anaphylactic reactions to any vaccine. And then going to the point you made, I am worried that the rest of the language is too broad. And I worry that people will be denied vaccine unnecessarily. And should we not just, I would recommend maybe saying a precaution to people who've had anaphylactic reactions to other medications, but not a contraindication. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maldonado. Dr. Maldonado, I think you're still on mute. I see you're unmuted, but we don't hear you. Let me move to Dr. Atmar and come back to you after his comments. Dr. Atmar, please.
Thank you, Dr. Romero. I want to add my agreement to Dr. Paling's comment about, and your prior observation about the allergy. I don't have much else to add to that, but I did want to raise a question about the guidance that is potentially forthcoming tomorrow. The clinical considerations help us deal with the individual for us and vaccinating them, but doesn't really address the concerns that institutions, healthcare institutions, are going to have to deal with in handling the expected side effects that will occur in the 24 to 48 hours after injection. And while I'm gratified that there will be some guidance, I was wondering if that might be previewed today, such that there could be some public discussion of whatever those recommendations may be. Over.
Any comment from the group?
Dr. Romero, this is Dr. Cohn. If you could, we are welcome to share that. If we could take one more question and answer it first, we just need 1 second to make sure we are pulling up the right language before we share it.
Thank you.
Sharon, I also had a comment on that. I was concerned yesterday about the language about how sites should be prepared to manage an anaphylactic reaction. And one of the pieces in there was about airway protection, relating, I'm assuming, to intubation. And most places that give vaccines aren't able or capable of intubating individuals, if that's what it was referring to. And so I think we need clarification around that also. Thank you.
And Jose, this is Peter Salagi. That was exactly my question too. And we're getting questions about do sites need special equipment that they don't normally have for vaccines? This includes both healthcare sites as well as pharmacies.
Thank you. Let me go back to Dr. Maldonado and see if she's got her audio problems addressed. Dr. Maldonado. I'm sorry, we still can't hear you. Let me move to Dr. Bernstein.
Thank you, Dr. Romero. So I'm in total agreement that this Pfizer vaccine appears to be remarkably safe and amazingly effective. And there's no question that COVID-19 vaccines are key, critically important elements in managing our growing public health emergency. But I still have one lingering concern, and that is the overall inclusion of 16 and 17-year-olds. Why I'm concerned? Because the study data are very limited for this subpopulation in Pfizer's interim analyses. Their protocol amendment to include individuals as young as 16 was only finalized on September 8th, and then this group was followed through November 14th, when data was presented to the FDA. Their demographic table in the VRBPAC briefing document lists only 153 total subjects, 16 to under 18-year-olds, split between the vaccine and placebo groups. This timing obviously also didn't allow a sufficient number of subjects in this age group to be adequately represented for the median follow-up period of 2 months, like the thousands of others in the trial. We also know that the systemic reactions were generally more frequent and severe in the younger age group compared with the older age group, and after the second dose compared with the first. We also saw that grade 3 reactions, 8.8% in the vaccinated group versus 2.1% in the placebo group, were more commonly reported after the second dose. So fortunately, this 16 and 17-year-old age group has not had a disproportionate morbidity and mortality as in the other specific groups. I also appreciate that this younger age group can actively transmit SARS-CoV-2 infection to contacts in their families and communities. Unfortunately, though, vaccine hesitancy is an overall growing concern, and a successful pediatric vaccination program depends on creating and sustaining parental confidence in both the safety and effectiveness of this vaccine. It should be remembered, too, that serious and unexpected side effects might well occur. So in summary for me, if this 16 and 17-year-old age group is included as issued by the FDA and its EUA, I would propose that we consider adding this age group as a special population in these interim clinical considerations, explaining that available data is limited at this time. As many as 2,000 subjects in this 16 and 17-year-old age group are continuing to be studied, so additional data are anticipated in the near future. Thank you.
This is Dr. Oliver. Hi.
Hello. I think sorry, this is Bonnie. Am I here? Am I in now? Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Let's let Dr. Maldonado go. Let's let Dr. Maldonado make her statement. Then we'll go back to addressing this.
We'd like to comment quickly to Dr. Bernstein and then move forward. I'm sorry, we just had a very specific comment. Thank you. Just wanted to thank you for raising that very specific issue. We're happy to discuss that addition of that in a clinical consideration, and wanted to let you know that shortly we will be putting up language for the vote and welcome additional discussion around that as well. So yeah, right now we're going to focus on the clinical consideration questions, and then we will move to the language of a specific vote.
All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Maldonado, since you have your audio problem resolved, why don't we go forward with your comment?
Yeah, thank you. My comment now is around two issues. The first is I wanted to support Dr. Eckert and the members of ACOG. We were representatives from AAP were on that call as well. We were very impressed with the subject matter expertise around the issue of mRNA platforms and the lack of evidence for any harm to be caused at this time. And so we are in full support of the recommendations and the support of ACOG, and would recommend that any of those materials, educational materials, also be provided for pediatricians and general providers as well, because many of these pregnant women who will be asking for advice will not be seeking advice directly from their OB providers, but may be coming to pediatricians and others. And we are very supportive of allowing pregnant women and lactating women to receive the vaccine, because the risks of disease clearly outweigh any potential and theoretical risks of the vaccine platform. Secondly, I would like to comment on this issue of what I consider inequity of not allowing 16 to 17-year-olds on no basis for safety differential between 16 to 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds. And I think that there is absolutely no evidence, in my view, that has been presented to in any platform that suggests that there should be any sliding scale of differential safety risks in those populations. And in fact, these are children that are particularly vulnerable because they may be working in frontline situations where they must be in contact with patients and others at risk of infection, and yet may not have access to vaccines. So I'm very concerned about this message being sent out that this vaccine will not be safe in children and has not been proven to be safe in children, because we currently have no evidence that that is the case, and that 16 to 70-year-olds are biologically or physiologically different in their response or their safety risks compared to 18-year-old children, to 18-year-old adults. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maldonado. Again, I want to remind everyone, let us focus on this part of the presentation. There will be time to make specific comments regarding the 16, 17-year-old later, but let's turn to this. Do you want to address the document that's on the screen, Dr. Oliver or Dr. Monet?
Yes, this is Dr. Mbaye. So up on the screen right now is the guidance document around infection prevention and control considerations for healthcare personnel with systemic signs and symptoms following COVID-19 vaccination. And I just want to also mention that the contents of this guidance will be part of the planned COCA call for Monday. So further information will be presented there. But the goal of this guidance is to address the concerns raised by a number of committee members around how healthcare systems can manage the expected and common post-vaccination symptoms that people might experience, to avoid them being unnecessarily excluded for work when they only have post-vaccination signs and symptoms, but also to prevent them to be inadvertently allowed to be working with potential SARS-CoV-2 or another transmissible infection. So a lot of these considerations are based on what we have observed in clinical trials, that these systemic post-vaccination signs and symptoms are mild to moderate in severity, occur within the first 3 days of vaccination, and resolve within 1 to 2 days of onset. If you scroll down a little bit, we can just briefly review some of the proposed considerations. So as one of the members mentioned, some of these considerations might include vaccinating healthcare personnel preceding 1 to 2 days off, staggering delivery of the vaccine so that not everybody in a single unit or department gets it at one time, informing healthcare personnel about the potential for these short-term systemic signs and symptoms and potential options for mitigating them, such as acetaminophen or NSAIDs. Also developing a strategy to provide timely assessment of healthcare personnel with signs and symptoms of post-vaccination, including viral testing to rule out infection as a cause, or infectious symptoms, and offering non-punitive sick leave. So the rest of the document has some specific approaches. If you scroll down a little bit through this, there's a table that you can stop here that addresses healthcare personnel with signs and symptoms unlikely to be from COVID-19 vaccination. So how to evaluate these people if people have symptoms that are not consistent with post-vaccination but are potentially consistent with SARS-CoV-2 infection. There are specific approaches recommended. And then if you scroll down again to the next page, this section is for, go up a little bit, this section is for healthcare personnel that have signs and symptoms that may be consistent either with those symptoms observed following vaccination or SARS-CoV-2 infection, since some of these symptoms do overlap. And there are specific recommendations about return to work criteria, testing, et cetera. But again, this will be presented in more detail.
Thank you very much for that clarification. That is very useful. And as we plan for the implementation of this vaccine, I think they're going to come in very handy. Thank you.
Dr. Romero, I just wanted to just to add, sorry to interrupt, I just wanted to add that we did seek consultation with outside groups such as IDSA and SHEA on this guidance as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Maldonado, your hand is still up. I just want to make sure that you don't have anything else to say.
Oh, no, sorry. I'll take it down. Sorry.
No need for apology. Just want to be sure. Dr. Rockwell, please.
Hi there, Pamela Rockwell, American Academy of Family Physicians. I just wanted to make a comment on the one slide that was titled immunocompromised persons and giving direction for persons with HIV or other immunocompromising conditions, etc. The way I read the language and the state that these individuals, meaning immunocompromised persons, may still receive COVID-19 vaccine unless otherwise contraindicated. So I was wondering if there was any thought that the autoimmune diseases could be addressed as being okay and safe if somebody has that, because that's one of the most common questions I'm getting from patients and other physicians about patients that have autoimmune diseases and who are on immunosuppressants. Thank you. Excuse me, that would also include transplant patients.
Thanks, Dr. Rockwell. Oh, sorry. Just to respond to that question, we are also aware that is a really important group of patients to provide guidance and clinical guidance around. At this time, you are correct. There is no contraindication for vaccination in any of those individuals. Those individuals who are on immunosuppressants, the vaccine may not be as efficacious, but we believe these vaccines are safe in those groups. And we will add a section to address those directly in this document.
Thank you. I think part of the fear is this myth going around that or concern going around that their autoimmune disease can flare with a hypersensitivity reaction.
Thank you. Ms. McNally.
Thank you. I'm looking at the fact sheet for recipients, and I'm just hoping that someone can kind of walk me through 2 points under the side effects. Under the what you should mention your provider before you get the Pfizer vaccine. So it says have a bleeding disorder or on a blood thinner. So I'm just trying to understand what the issue with those are in relation to this vaccine. And then my second question on this is, it says, or plan to become pregnant. And so I'm wondering what the duration of time is that the clinician would advise the recipient to avoid receiving the vaccine, if they plan to become pregnant, or if they would advise them that. And then finally, moving down, I'm wondering where it says, what are the risks of the Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine? And I guess I'm not seeing here where it says anaphylaxis, and I don't know if that needs to be addressed. So I'm posing the question. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to address the first question about people with bleeding disorders or who are on blood thinning medications, this would really refer to those people whose bleeding disorder is so severe that there might be issues with bleeding after vaccination. But that, again, that would be something that they would discuss with their provider.
Ms. McNally, do you feel that that's answered your question?
Is that common for other vaccines?
Ms. McNally, that is very similar as what we say in our general recommendations for other vaccines. I do want to remind everyone that the patient fact sheet that I believe you're looking at is the Pfizer fact sheet that was authorized by FDA but developed by Pfizer. So they may have an additional comment on that fact sheet, but the products that CDC will put together will talk about some of the things that are in the Pfizer fact sheet in a way that is more in a way that's more accessible to the individual making the decision or talking to their provider.
Let me ask if Pfizer wishes to comment on that. And Dr. Dormitzer, I know your hand has been up and you've been very patient. we're going to call on you after all the other liaisons and voting members have spoken. But if Pfizer would like to offer comment at this moment about that particular issue.
I think we're asking about the anaphylaxis issue in the EUA patient fact sheet.
Maybe not.
So,
yeah, I think Dr. Romero, we should move.
Bill Dermott here, Chief Scientific Officer of Pfizer. I think at this point, I think those reactions are currently under investigation. So I think at this point, we're awaiting the results of the investigation. I have my hand up for a different comment, and I'll wait to be called on for that, the other issues.
Thank you, sir.
It's Susan Mather from Pfizer. If you could repeat the question you had on the anaphylaxis cases from the UK. Was there a question on?
It's okay. So the question was specifically, is there any other language in the patient fact sheet that addresses anaphylaxis beyond the contraindication that individuals with a history of anaphylaxis to vaccine or any of the expedients or ingredients in the vaccine should not be vaccinated? I believe the answer is no, there's not, and that the providers would be relying on additional information from CDC for that clinical guidance, but we just wanted to confirm.
Yes, the language that was agreed to be in the fact sheet with the FDA as of last night is the language that's in there. It's slightly different for the healthcare provider and for the vaccine recipients, but that's what is in those fact sheets is the summation of it.
Thank you. Dr. Kim, sorry, Dr. Kim.
I'm sorry, I want to go back, sorry, about the guidance on the plan to become pregnant. What's the duration of time that's advised on that by the clinician?
This is Dr. Oliver. CDC is not going to have recommendations around that. The Pfizer fact sheet is independent of what CDC's recommendations necessarily are going to be around pregnancy, and we'll make sure that the information that CDC has around pregnancy will be posted soon in conjunction with ACOG and AAP and everybody that was mentioned previously.
Ms. McNally, any other comments or clarifications that you need?
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Kim, I cut you off. Go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you. For a general community member who's in quarantine for possible
the Antilles Gym of Belmar, New Jersey. I'm going to tell you a quick story about what's happened to me and what we've done, and I want to leave you with 2 lessons today.
Our chairman right over there, my friend. Just look to the cameras. They're all over there. Boom mics and all kinds of stuff. Among the groups joining this protest are the Proud Boys. They've gathered in the street, waiting for this demonstration to start. I didn't know I heard some shit about your doctor here. And I was like, oh.
You won't see the actual ones. They have all their little minions that they brainwashed.
Yeah.
You need to make a... Oh, you found where you wanted to go. A lot of the streets you what news station?
And making sure that that's maintained and sustained over generations to come is our children of the ground. So for someone watching this and like, well, this is all right now. There was corruption and election interference. Trump is one now saying that it doesn't happen.
Rise, comrades.
Hi, CBS News.
Hey, how's it going, man? I'm Joe Biggs.
I was told you were the man to talk to.
Yeah, what's going on?
So, can you give me your name on camera?
Yeah, my name is Joe Biggs.
All right, so tell me what you expect to happen today.
Well, today, what do I expect to happen, or what would I like to happen?
Well, what do you want to see happen?
Well, what I want to see happen is I want to see our group march through the streets peacefully and do what we do, with the other side keeping their hands to themselves. But what's going to really happen is Antifa and those guys don't know how to keep their hands to themselves because they're a bunch of babies or toddlers, and they like to pitch a fit and be violent and act crazy. So, if they fuck around, they'll find out.
All right, so you're anticipating the possibility of a clash.
Yeah, I would assume that would happen. I mean, these guys can't keep their hands to themselves. They've proven that for the last 4 or 5 years. So, it's kind of crazy that we have to come to these things and plan security and look at things from that aspect. Instead of just being able to come to our nation's capital, march, have 2 different ideologies, and be able to go home and worry about it. Now you have to worry about, hey, am I going to come home? Am I going to lose an eye? Am I going to get shot? Am I going to get run over? It's pretty messed up.
Yeah, but part of that, you must admit, in fairness, the Proud Boys have now a reputation, in part because of...
Well, we have a reputation that we defend ourselves. We don't sit there and get bullied and pushed around, and that's what America should do. We should stand up for what we believe in, but we're not the aggressors. But like I said, if someone does come around, they will find out. We'll put